The year was 1943. Across the skies of Europe, the war was intensifying at an unprecedented pace. Cities were blackened by smoke, and the hum of engines from countless aircraft filled the air from dawn to dusk. For the German Luftwaffe, the airspace above France, Belgium, and the Low Countries had long been their domain. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s roared through the clouds, patrolling, intercepting, and shooting down Allied bombers with deadly precision. These pilots were elite, hand-picked, rigorously trained, and battle-hardened. They had grown accustomed to dominating the skies, their skill almost untouchable, their confidence nearly unshakable. Yet, the tides of war were about to shift. Across the Atlantic, in the factories of the United States, engineers and mechanics were crafting a new type of fighter aircraft, the North American P-51 Mustang. On paper, it was a sleek, unassuming fighter. Its polished aluminum fuselage gleamed in the sun, and its streamlined wings promised speed. But its heart, the Packard-built Merlin engine, licensed from Britain, gave it unparalleled power. Unlike other Allied aircraft, the Mustang could fly high and fast, remain with long-range bombers deep into enemy territory, and maneuver with deadly precision. Initial reports filtered back to the Luftwaffe through intelligence and the occasional prisoner interrogation. They spoke of a plane that could climb faster than any Messerschmitt, sustain speed at altitudes where the Luftwaffe once ruled, and carry enough firepower to decimate bomber formations. Pilots who had faced the Mustang described it as ghost-like, appearing suddenly, striking, and vanishing before a response could be mustered. On the ground, in the German airfields of northern France, whispers began circulating. Pilots who had encountered the Mustang on brief sorties returned visibly shaken. "It's unlike anything we've faced," said one young pilot, his hands trembling as he wrote his report. "We can't catch it. We can't hit it." Such admissions were rare. Fear was considered unprofessional, almost disgraceful in the Luftwaffe. Yet here it was, genuine, palpable, and spreading among the squadrons. Meanwhile, across the Channel, the American and British pilots trained relentlessly, flying the Mustang with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. They were aware of the legends they would soon encounter, elite German pilots, masters of dogfighting, whose names struck fear across the Allied ranks. But the Mustang, with its combination of speed, firepower, and endurance, offered them something new, a chance not just to survive, but to dominate the skies above occupied Europe. The first encounters were shocking. On a cold, gray morning over northern France, a squadron of Bf-109s took to the air, expecting a routine patrol. They were confident, flying in tight formation, eyes scanning the horizon for any Allied bombers to intercept. Then a glint of silver appeared in the clouds. Engines hummed differently, wings cut through the sky with uncanny precision. The Mustangs had arrived. Combat erupted in an instant. The German pilots, trained to anticipate the predictable movements of Allied fighters, were thrown off by the Mustang's agility. It could climb vertically with ease, outpace any aircraft at high altitudes, and execute sudden, razor-sharp turns that left Messerschmitts spinning helplessly. Witnesses described the attacks as surreal. They would dive from above, strike, and then vanish before a response could be mustered. Ground control observed in disbelief as reports came in of entire formations of Bf-109s unable to engage effectively. Squadron leaders tried to adapt tactics, increasing numbers in formation, attempting to encircle the Mustangs, but each maneuver seemed to play into the Allies' hands. The P-51s were faster, smarter, almost prescient in the way they fought. By the end of the day, the German pilots returned to base exhausted, frustrated, and terrified. But it wasn't just about the fighting. Fear began creeping into every corner of the Luftwaffe. Pilots who once boasted of their invincibility now hesitated at the radio, second-guessing every maneuver. Orders were given with caution. No one wanted to volunteer for a direct confrontation with the Mustang. The psychological impact was profound. Confidence, once a hallmark of German airmen, was replaced with anxiety. In the Allied camps, the Mustang became a symbol of hope. Pilots whispered about its performance, its reliability, and its uncanny ability to turn the tide of air battles. It was no longer merely a tool. It was a legend in the making. The aircraft not only gave them the power to escort bombers to the heart of Germany, but also the psychological edge that was vital in aerial warfare. As the sun set over the war-torn fields of northern France, one truth became undeniable. The skies would never be the same. The Mustang had arrived, not just as a fighter, but as a predator that would haunt the dreams of Luftwaffe pilots. And in the months to come, those who faced it would come to understand a terrifying reality. Experience, skill, and courage alone might not be enough to survive the wrath of the P-51 Mustang.
The early morning mist clung to the fields of northern France, softening the outlines of the villages below. In the skies, a squadron of Bf-109s soared with confidence, their pilots scanning for the familiar black crosses of Allied bombers. Lieutenant Klaus Weber, a young but experienced pilot, led the formation. His fingers drummed nervously against the throttle. Something felt different today. Reports of a new Allied fighter had reached them, but no one had actually seen one in combat. Now that uncertainty gnawed at them. Then, suddenly, the sun glinted off polished aluminum wings. A sharp roar cut through the mist, and above them, the P-51 Mustangs appeared in a precise V formation. The sight was mesmerizing and terrifying. The Mustangs were unlike any aircraft they had encountered. Their speed and altitude gave them an almost ghost-like presence, appearing suddenly and moving too fast to track easily. "Formation tight! Don't underestimate them!" Klaus barked into his radio. But even as he spoke, he felt the familiar confidence slip. One of his wingmen, Werner, looked pale. "They're too fast," he muttered, gripping his controls tightly. "I can't get on their tail." The first engagement was brutal. A Mustang dove from above, guns blazing, aiming for the bombers the Bf-109s were supposed to protect. Tracers cut through the foggy sky, and explosions rippled across the formation. The German pilots tried to respond, but the Mustang's speed and maneuverability made them almost untouchable. They struck, then climbed sharply, leaving smoke trails behind the confused Messerschmitts. Klaus banked sharply, his plane shuddering as he followed a Mustang in a steep turn. "He's on my 6!" he shouted. The enemy plane twisted effortlessly, evading his guns. Time seemed to stretch. Every maneuver, a battle of instinct. Every second, a question of life and death. Pilots felt the sweat drip beneath their helmets, muscles straining, hearts racing. The air was thick with adrenaline, fear, and the smell of fuel and gunfire. Meanwhile, the Mustangs coordinated with precision. They used the classic boom and zoom tactic, diving at high speed, firing, then climbing to regain altitude before the Germans could counterattack. It was a strategy that maximized their strengths and exploited the weaknesses of the Messerschmitts. For the Luftwaffe, it was disorienting. Pilots who had faced countless dogfights before found themselves outmatched, their usual tactics ineffective. During one intense dogfight, Klaus spotted a Mustang climbing rapidly above him. He tried to follow, but the plane moved as if it anticipated every turn. His guns fired frantically, but the tracers went wide. "Damn it," he cursed under his breath. Around him, other German pilots were either diving, evading, or disappearing behind clouds. Unsure whether they were being chased or attacking, it was chaos in the sky. On the ground, Luftwaffe commanders listened to the radio transmissions with growing unease. Reports of downed aircraft, missing pilots, and unexplained maneuvers filled the airwaves. Fear began to replace strategy. Young pilots were hesitant to engage. Experienced ones were frustrated by the Mustang's unorthodox tactics. Every encounter reinforced the growing legend: the P-51 Mustang was a predator, and the Luftwaffe was suddenly prey. Back in the cockpit of one Mustang, Captain Jimmy Harris grinned beneath his oxygen mask. He had flown countless sorties, but the excitement today was different. He felt the power of the Merlin engine beneath him, responding effortlessly to every maneuver. He and his squadron executed their attack with near-perfect coordination. Each pass through the enemy formation left chaos in its wake. Jimmy glanced down at the bombers they were protecting and felt a surge of pride. Finally, they could ensure the bombers reached their targets with less risk. As the dogfight wore on, the toll was visible. Smoke plumes marked downed Messerschmitts. Pilots returned to their airfields with trembling hands and haunted eyes. Klaus Weber landed, his plane battered but intact. He climbed out of the cockpit and stared at the horizon, the weight of fear pressing down on him. "We need to adapt, or we won't survive," he muttered, almost to himself. The first blood had been spilled in the skies, and the psychological impact was profound. For the Luftwaffe, it was no longer enough to rely on experience and reputation. The P-51 Mustang had changed the rules of aerial warfare. It was faster, deadlier, and smarter than anything they had faced. And most terrifying of all, it showed no mercy. In the days that followed, Luftwaffe squadrons tried to develop new tactics. They coordinated attacks in larger formations, experimented with different maneuvers, and attempted to bait the Mustangs into mistakes. But each encounter only confirmed the truth. The Mustang was a game changer. Every dogfight, every pass, every near miss built a reputation that would echo across Europe and haunt German pilots for the rest of the war. By the end of that week, the legend of the P-51 was firmly established. Pilots spoke in hushed tones. Intelligence officers updated their reports with increasing urgency. And the German command began to recognize that they were facing not just a new aircraft, but a new era of air combat. The Mustang had arrived, and it was rewriting the rules of the sky.
By early 1944, the Allies had established air superiority in Western Europe, but every mission was still a perilous gamble. The primary challenge was escorting long-range bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, deep into German territory. Without fighters, these bombers were sitting ducks, vulnerable to the deadly claws of the Luftwaffe. But with the P-51 Mustang, the Allies had gained a tool that could change the outcome of the war in the air. Captain James "Jimmy" Harris was briefing his squadron on another mission over northern Germany. The sun had just risen, casting a pale gold glow across the airfield. The air smelled of fuel, oil, and anticipation. Harris's Mustang squadron was tasked with escorting a formation of 40 B-17 bombers targeting factories in the Ruhr Valley. Intelligence suggested that 2 Luftwaffe Gruppen would intercept. As they climbed into the clouds, the squadron kept tight formation, each pilot aware that a single misstep could be fatal. The radio crackled with tension. "Stay high, stay fast, stay alert. The Germans are aggressive today," Harris reminded them. Around him, pilots tightened their grips on the control sticks, scanning the gray sky for any movement. Within 20 minutes, the first silhouettes appeared on the horizon, Messerschmitts, cutting through clouds like knives. For German pilots, these missions were as much about survival as combat. Major Hans Richter led his Gruppe knowing that each encounter with Mustangs could be deadly. Their orders were to disrupt the bomber formation and inflict as much damage as possible. The first engagement began with a flash of tracer fire. Mustangs dived toward the Messerschmitts with surgical precision, their pilots employing boom and zoom tactics. Harris's squadron split into pairs, covering the bombers from every angle. The sky erupted into chaos. Engine roars, machine gun fire, and the metallic rattle of tracer rounds filled the air. Smoke spiraled from damaged aircraft, while others weaved desperately to evade attack.
Harris spotted a Bf-109 diving toward a straggling B-17. Without hesitation, he rolled his Mustang into position, aiming carefully. Tracers tore through the air, and the German fighter spiraled down in flames. Around him, the rest of the squadron fought with equal intensity. Each maneuver required split-second decisions, balancing protection of the bombers with survival. Meanwhile, German pilots experienced terror they had never known. Veteran aces who had dominated European skies found themselves outmaneuvered, outpaced, and often outgunned. The P-51's speed and endurance meant that it could climb, dive, and reposition faster than any Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf, turning each encounter into a psychological battle as much as a physical one. Fear became the new normal, and mistakes were often fatal. Amidst the chaos, individual heroics shone through. Lieutenant Erich Müller, a young German pilot, found himself alone against two Mustangs. He looped and twisted, firing bursts of his guns, trying to survive long enough to return to base. On the Allied side, Harris's wingman, Lieutenant Robert "Bobby" Allen, executed a daring maneuver to shield a heavily damaged B-17, drawing fire away from the bomber and forcing an enemy fighter to disengage. These moments defined the courage and desperation of pilots on both sides. The mission lasted hours, the sky a vast theater of smoke, fire, and aerial maneuvers. By the time the bombers reached their target and began the long flight home, the Mustang squadrons had inflicted significant losses on the Luftwaffe while ensuring most of the bombers survived. The psychological impact was immense. German pilots returned to their bases shaken, counting losses and questioning tactics. In contrast, Allied pilots gained confidence with each successful mission, cementing the Mustang's reputation as the ultimate escort fighter. Throughout these operations, stories spread quickly. Tales of Mustangs that seemed to anticipate every enemy movement, pilots performing near impossible maneuvers, and entire formations of Luftwaffe fighters being repelled became the stuff of legend. Intelligence reports began labeling the Mustang as the red-tailed predator, and morale among Allied airmen soared. By mid-1944, the impact of these escort missions was clear. The Luftwaffe could no longer dominate the skies over Germany. The Mustang had leveled the playing field and in many cases tipped it decisively in favor of the Allies. It was not just an aircraft. It was a psychological weapon, a guardian of bombers, and a symbol of hope for the crews risking their lives in every sortie. As the chapter closes, the narrative of air supremacy was forever altered. The P-51 Mustang had proven its worth, and the Luftwaffe was forced to adapt, often unsuccessfully. The stage was set for increasingly daring operations, larger engagements, and heroic tales that would define the air war over Europe, and the Mustang would remain at the center of it all, feared, respected, and immortalized in the annals of aerial warfare.
By mid-1944, the P-51 Mustang had transformed the air war over Europe. No longer were the Luftwaffe's fighter pilots masters of the sky. The arrival of these sleek, powerful aircraft had shifted the balance, and with it came stories that would become legend. From the North Sea to the Ruhr Valley, every sortie carried the weight of survival, honor, and fear. The German perspective. Major Hans Richter, a seasoned Luftwaffe ace, had faced countless Allied fighters before. He had scored victories over Spitfires and Hurricanes, and his squadron had a reputation for efficiency and ruthlessness. But the Mustangs were different. Flying over northern Germany, he encountered a flight of red-tailed P-51s escorting bombers to a key industrial target in Essen. "They are faster than anything we have," he muttered into his radio, "and they don't hesitate. They dive, they climb, they attack, and they're gone before we even fire a shot." The psychological strain on German pilots was enormous. They were expected to defend their homeland, but every encounter with the Mustang brought uncertainty, fear, and frustration. Even the most experienced aces began doubting tactics that had previously ensured survival. In many airfields, morale began to fray.
Pilots would speak in hushed tones of the ghost fighters, the Mustangs that could appear anywhere in the sky and vanish without a trace. The Allied perspective. On the American side, pilots such as Captain James "Jimmy" Harris and his wingman Lieutenant Robert "Bobby" Allen were becoming legends themselves. Each mission over Berlin or the Ruhr was a delicate dance between aggression and caution. The Mustang's speed, firepower, and range allowed these pilots to escort bombers deep into the heart of Germany, a feat previously impossible. The thrill of survival, mixed with the fear of death, created a tension that made every second in the cockpit feel monumental. On a mission targeting the industrial city of Leipzig, Harris's squadron climbed to 25,000 feet to meet the incoming Luftwaffe fighters. The sky was a patchwork of clouds and sun, shadows moving across the ground below. Suddenly, silhouettes appeared on the horizon, 20 FW-190s diving with intent. The Mustangs responded instantly. Harris gave orders with calm precision. Split into pairs, cover the bombers, keep altitude advantage, stay together. His squadron obeyed with practiced discipline, knowing that one mistake could be fatal. The engagement unfolded like a choreographed ballet of death. Mustangs dove from above, their guns blazing, forcing German fighters into defensive maneuvers. German aces attempted to intercept the bombers, but the Mustang pilots anticipated every move, using boom and zoom tactics that exploited the enemy's weaknesses. Smoke trails marked enemy aircraft as they spiraled down, engines failing, pilots ejecting or plummeting to their deaths. During this chaotic battle, individual heroism stood out. Lieutenant Allen maneuvered his Mustang between a bomber and a Messerschmitt diving for the kill. He fired controlled bursts, forcing the German pilot to veer away. Harris covered Allen's flank, simultaneously engaging another enemy fighter, turning what could have been disaster into a coordinated triumph. The Mustang's ability to fight as a unit while protecting the bombers solidified their reputation as not just fighters, but guardians of the air. The turning point. These missions were more than tactical victories, they were psychological ones. German pilots began to report feelings of dread before even taking off. Entire formations hesitated to engage Mustangs, knowing the odds were stacked against them. The P-51's combination of speed, firepower, and endurance made it impossible to ignore, and German losses mounted steadily. Stories circulated among Luftwaffe crews. A young pilot flying his first sortie returned shaking. They dive from above, you never see them coming, and suddenly they're gone. We can't hit them. Even veterans like Major Richter were forced to reconsider everything they had learned about aerial combat. Every dogfight became not only a test of skill, but a battle against fear itself. Legacy and legend. By late 1944, the Mustang's reputation was cemented. The skies of Germany were no longer safe for the Luftwaffe. The aircraft had become a symbol of Allied dominance and a nightmare for German pilots. Tales of incredible maneuvers, heroic rescues of bombers, and entire squadrons being repelled by a few Mustangs spread rapidly. It wasn't just a plane. It was a legend, a psychological weapon, and a guardian of the skies. As the chapter closes, one truth is undeniable. The Mustang had altered the very nature of aerial warfare. The Luftwaffe's confidence was shattered, their strategies forced to evolve under pressure, and every pilot knew that facing the Mustang was facing a predator unlike any before. The era of unchallenged German air supremacy had ended. The sky belonged to the P-51, and with it, the Allies gained the power to change the course of the war.
By late 1944, the war in the air had entered a new, decisive phase. The Allies were pushing relentlessly into German territory, and every bombing mission carried enormous risk. Factories, railroads, and military installations were vital targets. Protecting the bombers was no longer just a matter of skill, it was a matter of survival. The P-51 Mustang, now an experienced veteran of countless sorties, was the key to success. The morning briefing. In a small airfield near London, Captain James "Jimmy" Harris and his squadron received orders for a mission over Berlin. The sun had barely risen, casting a cold gray light over the frost-covered airstrip. Harris traced the route on the map, nearly 600 miles deep into enemy territory, crossing heavily defended airspace. Intelligence reported several Luftwaffe Jagdgeschwader ready to intercept. The pilots knew the odds, yet morale was high. They trusted their Mustangs and each other. Lieutenant Robert "Bobby" Allen leaned over his console. Berlin. It's farther than we've ever gone with a full bomber formation, and they're waiting for us. His voice carried a mix of tension and resolve. Harris clapped a hand on his shoulder. We fly together, we protect the bombers, and we watch each other's six. We've done this before, we'll do it again. The journey begins. The Mustangs lifted into the pale morning sky, engines thrumming like a heartbeat. Formation tight, they climbed above the clouds, the bombers below like steel islands gliding over a sea of white. Hours passed as they crossed Belgium and the Low Countries, scanning relentlessly for enemy fighters. Every shadow on the clouds, every glint of sun on a distant wing could mean attack. First contact. Over northern Germany, the first silhouettes appeared, Focke-Wulf FW-190s diving from above. The attack was sudden. The Luftwaffe, desperate to protect the Reich, threw everything into the engagement. Harris barked orders, boom and zoom, keep altitude advantage, protect the bombers at all costs. The sky became a chaotic symphony of noise and violence. Tracer rounds cut through the clouds, engines screamed under sudden dives and climbs, and smoke spiraled from damaged planes. The Mustangs executed coordinated maneuvers, pairing off to intercept each threat while simultaneously shielding the bomber formation. Every second was a life-or-death decision. Heroic maneuvers. Lieutenant Robert Allen spotted an FW-190 preparing to strike a B-17 trailing behind. Without hesitation, he dove his Mustang between the bomber and the fighter, opening fire. The German pilot twisted sharply, avoiding some of the attack, but Allen's accurate bursts forced him to disengage. Nearby, Harris engaged a formation of Bf-109s weaving in and out of cloud cover, forcing multiple enemy fighters into defensive positions. The precision and coordination of the Mustang squadrons were unmatched. Desperation on both sides. German pilots fought with ferocity, knowing each sortie might be their last. Veteran aces executed extreme maneuvers, attempting to outwit the Mustangs. Yet the psychological advantage lay with the Allies. The fear induced by the P-51 Mustang's unmatched performance caused hesitation, mistakes, and miscalculations. Even the most skilled Luftwaffe pilots were at a disadvantage. The toll. Smoke plumes dotted the sky as German aircraft fell in flames. Some pilots bailed out, parachuting to uncertain fates. Mustangs also suffered damage, but the majority returned to base. The bombers, despite losses, reached their target. Each mission deepened the legend of the Mustang, an aircraft capable of escorting bombers farther into the heart of Germany than any other fighter in history. Individual stories. One young Mustang pilot, Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Jenkins, found himself isolated during the chaos. A Bf-109 dove on him from above. He rolled sharply, tracing the Mustang's unique agility, and fired a controlled burst. The German fighter spiraled away in flames. Breathing heavily, Jenkins rejoined the formation, his heart pounding with both adrenaline and the grim realization of how close death had been. Meanwhile, German Major Hans Richter surveyed the battlefield from above. His squadron had taken heavy losses. He realized that the Mustang had not just changed the tactics of combat, it had altered the very mindset of the Luftwaffe. Fear was now a weapon in itself, and the Mustangs wielded it with deadly efficiency. Conclusion of the mission. After hours of intense combat, the Mustangs guided the bombers safely home. Engines smoking, planes battered, pilots exhausted, the squadron landed back on British soil. The mission was a tactical victory, a psychological triumph, and a testament to the Mustang's unmatched performance. The stories of bravery, heroism, and the deadly dance between the Mustang and the Luftwaffe spread rapidly, inspiring future missions and reinforcing the aircraft's legendary status. As the chapter closes, the skies of Germany were no longer a sanctuary for the Luftwaffe. The P-51 Mustang had proven itself as a relentless predator, capable of turning the tide of aerial warfare. The most perilous missions had been survived, the bomber formations had been protected, and the legend of the Mustang would echo across Europe for the remainder of the war.